Hey guys, and welcome back to Betwixt the Books. It is our last reading roundtable for the year, but don't worry, there will definitely be more next year, but it is our final one for this year. Um, if you haven't noticed by my frame that I worked very hard on, which is hopefully in this video if everything has worked as it should work, there's a title above us that says that we're talking today about books that were shortlisted for an award this past year. Lucky us, we all picked a different award, so we're going to be talking about a bunch of different awards and also obviously the books that we read from those award categories. But again, if you haven't seen one of these videos before, it's just Gretchen and I bringing on some of our bookish friends from real life or the internet, where we all get to talk about different things. That's the joy of this format, is that we get to see such different things. We will go around and introduce ourselves, tell you a little bit about us as readers, and then we're going to go around again and talk about the things that we picked and what we thought of them or are thinking of them, and so on and so forth. So I'm going to give it over to Gretchen to start with the introductions.
Hi, I'm Gretchen, and I used to post videos every Monday that were on romance novels. I have not done that in months. I have, in fact, been posting videos on podcasts and true crime documentaries because, listen, it's been a time. I really do hope to get back to reading my romance novels. It has been such a hard semester that it's just even like turning my brain back on enough to read written words has been really hard. So for today, I did bring a nonfiction audiobook because I have been consuming a lot of nonfiction on audio, whether it is podcasts or nonfiction books. And this one is actually a winner of the Pulitzer Prize for biography. And so it is a history biography. And it's definitely something that I can't wait to tell you guys about, of early American history. It has to do with enslavement, it has to do with passing, and just like this big cultural moment that this story represents. Um, but it's also, again, I think a problem, and I've talked about this with some nonfiction books that I brought up before, where the way that the publisher sells the book and the way that the plot actually turns out is not the same. So we will talk about that too, when I get around to that. Because yeah, I'm either reading romance or I'm reading political or historical nonfiction. These are the two halves of my brain. Welcome.
Hi, I'm Erica. I am a librarian in my day job, and I mostly read fantasy. I try to go for that escapism as much as possible. The book that I chose won the 2024 Nebula Award for Best Novel. Um, so yeah, we'll dive into that in a bit.
Hello, my name is Josh. I am the producer and head panelist of the BookTube channel Literary Gladiators. We have had ourselves quite a year. We filmed 2 seasons this year. We plan to film 2 seasons next year. And I read anything and everything. It interests me in the slightest. I'm willing to give it an attempt. The book that I'm going to be talking about is a Splatterpunk Award winner, a winner of the Golden Poppy Octavia E. Butler Award, and it was nominated for Best New Novel for Bram Stoker.
Interesting. Okay. The thing that I'm finding interesting here is that we all chose winners, even though we did open it up just to shortlisted books, because I also, hi, I'm Michaela. I'm going to be talking about the winner of the Booker Prize today. So there's that, which is interesting. I normally read primarily speculative fiction. I lately have been reading mostly queer fiction. This is speculative adjacent. It was interesting to me when I saw the list that I basically said to Gretchen, there's a sci-fi pick on the list for the Booker. It's not actually sci-fi. I'll talk about it, but it seems sci-fi related. It is the first Booker book that has won that is set in space. So while it is set in space, I don't think it technically counts as sci-fi, and I'll talk a little bit more about that when I get into the whole thing. But yeah, we all, for whatever reason, chose the winners of specific awards. That's super fun.
I mean, kind of like the best thing about this too, because I think we talked about this before we started doing the reading roundtable, was like, should we ask people in advance what they're planning on reading so we can plan for it? Obviously, Michaela and I are in more constant contact about this specific thing. So we tend to know what we're reading, and then like, you know, maybe we'll find out. But like half the time it's like also like a super surprise. We've like never really planned this.
Yeah.
It has worked out every time.
Yeah.
I'm sure eventually we will get stung by our own hubris, but that's amazing. So anyway, and maybe too, like one thing that we can talk about too, maybe is just at the end, like the act of giving awards to books. There are people who do have like issues with plenty of these awards and like how the criteria, things like that. And so totally want to say before we get started that we're aware of those conversations. But this was like a way to, again, maybe try to stretch ourselves into new areas or try new things, or to like see, and again, for all of us, like what is winning these awards? Again, not intentional, but yeah, so the Pulitzer Award has many, many categories. So there's fiction, there's not like there's a whole bunch of them. So specifically the book that I read won for in the category of biography / autobiography. This is a biography. And it is called Master, Slave, Husband, Wife, An Epic Journey from Slavery to Freedom by Ilian Wu. And I may be saying the first name wrong, but it is Ilyon. That does a lot of things for my dyslexia, so I'm trying.
Are they Korean? Because if it's Korean, it's probably Ilyon. But yeah.
Ilion, okay. I don't know. Last name is Wu, W-O-O.
It might be
So
Chinese then.
this is a book, well, I think that's like another interesting layer to this as well. But this is the story of William and Ellen Craft, who were two enslaved people who self-emancipated, basically meaning that they escaped enslavement in the year of 1848. And kind of place you roughly in time here. And the general gist of like the book description, if you were to look at it on like Goodreads or something, really focuses a lot on the escape itself, which I will talk about because it's super interesting. But a lot of the reviews, and I think indeed the low ratings of this book that I've seen, have been because the book, even the subtitle, focuses a lot on their escape. A lot of people seem really confused when they escape at 50% of the way through the book. And then there is 50% of the book more to go. I do find quite a few things in that second half very interesting, but I'll just say right up front that this seems to be something that really upsets a lot of people in the reviews. So yeah, if you think it's just about the escape, no. But one of the reasons that they are able to escape is because Ellen in particular can pass as white. She is fathered by someone who enslaved her mother. And she has enough light skin that people are like, they see her and they assume that she's white, actually. And so this is actually why she is sent away at a certain point to go be enslaved by her half-sister, because her father's wife can't stand to have her in the house because she looks just like her sister. And because of her ability to pass, her and her husband, who is darker skinned than her, concoct this plan to dress Ellen as a white Southern gentleman and to have to take like the train and boats and things all the way up to Boston, pass, and that's why where kind of the title comes from, with Ellen posing as the master and William posing as her enslaved manservant. They also get through certain things like the fact that Ellen cannot sign her name, right? Because they have not been given any type of education. By adding a level of disability, they pretend that Ellen has rheumatism and also her arm is in a sling. So people like tend to, along their journey, take pity on this, young white, rich boy who's clearly has a disability. And that's often how Ellen gets out of signing her name or doing anything that might kind of like, she also pretends to be deaf or hard of hearing so that like she doesn't have to engage in conversation with people. And it also gives William, her husband, the excuse, if you will, to be very attentive to her and always be near her and that type of thing. And that story itself is really incredible. The different layers of the disguise and how they do or don't work as they're traveling from the deep south up towards the north, because obviously the feelings of the passengers on their public transit starting in the south as they go to the north are very different about like a white, slave owner, rich slave owner. So it's so interesting on like escape level, but also like on a cultural level, the way that they have to use different things and like different things as they go up. But they do eventually make it to Boston. And when they meet up there with the abolitionist movement, all of the abolitionists go, we have got to get you guys on the speaking circuit because this story, your escape, the way that you bent gender, you use the norms of the South against them to like facilitate your escape. We've got to get you guys on the lecture circuit. And despite the fact that publicizing their names and their story is extremely dangerous, they do choose to do so. And that's also interesting as well, because the way they have to tell their story changes, because for Ellen at this time, having dressed up as a man, even people who might be abolitionist are still uncomfortable with her gender bending. And the way that they have to like tell the story that like William had to like convince her to wear a men's clothing and stuff like that. And also Ellen's skin tone. Ellen talks about being extremely uncomfortable, how the abolitionist circuit tells their story about her being the white slave, and how she in particular is a big draw and really tugs at the heartstrings of a lot of white Northerners, because they basically see someone who, as far as they're concerned, looks exactly like them, who has been enslaved. And so her crossing of the color line in a certain way and how that changes as well. And then they're constantly, so they are on the abolitionist circuit. And at a certain point, there's the new fugitive slave law that is passed. They have to escape those people because their previous enslavers send people to come and get them. There's a huge legal battle. They have to escape to Canada. And eventually they do end up in London. And then there's a part of the end of the book that's like, you think that because London abolished slavery a while ago, that there wouldn't be prejudice, and they still experience a different type of prejudice once they get to London. So it really is the escape itself, that first 50% of the book is very beat by beat focused on Ellen and William. And then once it really gets to the second half of the book, it almost feels like the writing kind of changes because the lens gets so much wider to be on like cultural things and like that type of a thing. So in a certain way, it does kind of feel like there's like two halves of a book that are like in the same book. But I didn't mind it. I found honestly a lot of the cultural differences between different parts of the North, and then in Canada, and then in London, and how like you hear about North versus South, or like America versus London, and this story really makes clear that those types of binaries don't mean anything really in terms of like the prejudice and gender, class, race, all that type of stuff. So yeah, I really did enjoy it, but I think that people need to be aware that it's a little bit weird in the writing, I think, with the two halves of the book. But I'm glad that it won the Pulitzer, honestly, because I feel like this is a type of story that that more people need to know about that I certainly had never heard of before reading this book.
I remember seeing it. It was like the front cover of the New York Times Book Review when it came out, because we put that up in our library separate, and so I remember it being there. I was kind of like, on different lists and stuff. I think I probably saw it on APR as well. I was surprised it didn't get as many holds as I thought it would. It was like a little bit popular, but not like the women popular. So like what's interesting to me though is I'm fascinated at how the research was done. And I mean, like, obviously the research for a lot of these kinds of books and everything, especially where like she couldn't sign her name. Like how do you research that? Like what stories do you pull to get that information? And me as a non-academic, though, I don't really have a lot of those answers. I want to, but so it's like that's something that's super fascinating to me too. Is like how do you pull together a lot of this information? I remember like when we read The Wager, there was just like a couple of them had journals, and that was most, and like they wrote in them all the time. And that's mostly how they were able to gather the story of that. So something like this, that especially that spans continents, how do you get all that information? That's just fascinating to me.
So most of the information for this book actually comes from the crafts themselves. Once they gaining an education and the ability to be literate was very important to them. And basically, once they settled down and came off the lecture circuit, that was like their main goal, was learning how to read and write. So first there's the newspapers from when they were on the lecture circuit and people like relating
And
the stories.
that kind of, yeah, it was like,
Yes.
oh, okay, that makes a lot more sense when you
Yeah.
mentioned that they were doing a
And
lot of
then they
speaking.
did eventually write a book themselves, because you also have around that time, that's when like Frederick Douglass is publishing his memoir. They know Frederick Douglass. 12 Years a Slave, I think, around the same time. They are on the circuit with people like Henry Box Brown, who is the African American man who like puts himself in a box and ships himself to the North. And all of these people write texts. And so part of it is, and that's actually, I'm glad you brought that up though, because that's also how the book gets some of the different flavor text about how they told the story in different ways. Because like, for example, when they first published the book, it's only William's name on it. Because Ellen is a woman and that's not really a thing. And later editions of the book all have her name on them as well as a co-written text. And the different ways they like the papers report them telling the story, how active Ellen is in the telling, if she wanted to be dressed like a man or didn't. Like these are different newspaper reports, or how they know that they changed how they told the story a little bit.
I first came across this book through the BookTube Prize because it was a finalist for that as well. And the people that I watched that read and judged it they had a lot of intriguing things to say about it. And I was intrigued by it myself to the point, while I never read this book, I might consider doing so, but I wanted to do more research on the Fugitive Slave Act, and in turn, the Compromise of 1850, which which allowed the Fugitive Slave Act to take fruition. And the ironic thing is that Zachary Taylor was president at the time, and while the Compromise of 1850 approved of the admitting California to the Union, which is something that Taylor supported, he did not support the expansion of slavery and the Fugitive Slave Act. But ironically, he himself was a slave owner. He was from the South. But suspiciously enough, as Gretchen knows for sure, he died in office shortly thereafter. And he died very suspiciously. They said it was cherries and milk, but we don't know the details for sure. He had cholera. He basically was in the bathroom for or the outhouse for the last so many hours of his life, and then just succumbed, died. Millard
Yeah.
Fillmore became the next president, and he decided to approve of the Compromise of 1850 in its entirety. And the ironic thing about that is that he's from New York. So he is from free territory, but he decided that he wanted to please
I
whomever.
think, yeah, I think the thing is Millard Fillmore did not want to be president. Um, he was definitely one of those people because obviously he did not expect to be president. Like this was not his thing. And one of the interesting things is that the slave hunters are sent after the Crafts directly in the wake of Taylor dying. So there actually is like a POV in the book itself talking about the conversations actually being had with Fillmore because like the whole legal battle and like the way that Boston like treats the slave catchers as well, and like there's this whole thing like the judges going back and forth. It's like a huge chunk of the novel, and it gets to the point where there actually is like conversations with Millard Fillmore in the White House being like, we got to do something about this because it threatens to become a sectional issue because essentially Boston is not enforcing the law. So there is a good section in that as well, um, of that, and Fillmore basically just being like, eh.
Interesting how that it is brought up.
Yeah.
It's unfortunate that Millard Fillmore was not a good president because he did install the first official White House library, and he himself was a very active leader.
Well, that is I feel like I feel like a lot of times I don't always bring like nonfiction I'm happy I read. And I very nearly accidentally, not accidentally, but like I put a hold on Eric Larson's new book like a bajillion years ago, and that came through before my hold on this book. And I was like, well, I guess it counts because it's like a Goodreads Choice Awards finalist. All I have to say is I am not an Eric Larson fan. So I'm really glad that I don't have to talk about that book.
Have you read his other
Um
stuff?
I have read The Splendid and the Vile and one of the other ones. I think he's not for me.
Yeah.
But yeah, I did read his new one on the start of the Civil War, and I literally was just like, okay, that felt like it was 900 pages, and I don't understand the point of it. So that's my like 30-second review of the new Eric Larson. Anyway, Erica, would you like to tell us about your book?
Certainly. So I chose The Saint of Bright Doors, and I made the mistake of not pulling up this to have the author's name. I'm going to butcher this. Sorry. Author is Vajra Chandrasekhara. Sorry. Um, um, and so, like I said, that was a Sri Lankan author. Um, so um, it won the Nebula Award. Nebula Award is focused on sci-fi fantasy. Um, as an example, I believe Gretchen told me that Baldur's Gate won the Nebula Award. So Baldur's Gate 3 anyways. So fair warning, I am slightly under halfway through this book. Oops. Um, but it's a very interesting world where it's set up. It's set up in this world that has what I assume to be and would love to do more research into after I'm done with this book. Very Indian, Sri Lankan influences. And it's a world that's very similar to ours. There's texting, there's therapy, there's group sessions. But it's also a world with gods and demons, with chosen and like unchosen people. And so the story follows Fetter, a boy who was born to Mother of Glory, who um, basically raises him to kill his father, who is a god, or at the very least, a cult leader. Um, and being followed by at least two different sects. I believe the path above and the path below, or something like that. He is sent off and finds a home in the city of Buriat, which is where, like, as he finds his life there and everything, he finds a support group for other children who are kind of unchosen, who were like grown to be the chosen one, and then for whatever reason weren't anymore. So he's in like group sessions, he's in therapy, he's dealing with like the trauma that he went through with his mother, having like decided his life for him. But he's also roped into kind of a secret plot of going undercover as a student to research the bright doors of Laureate, which are doors that change once they've been closed and not paid attention to for a certain amount of time. And nobody knows anything about these doors or where they go or where they're from. And so he's kind of roped into being on the research team for it. But it affects Chosen a little bit differently. There's some interesting like caste discussions and stuff like that. And so I'm intrigued in it. It's been a little bit slow going. I don't know if the narrator is the best. I did get it on audiobook. If I was reading it, I probably would have powered through it a lot faster. And I probably would have felt like it was moving a bit quicker too. It feels kind of medium paced. There's some really great feeling in it. I think that a lot of the discussions of childhood trauma and like what you owe to your parents and how they still affect you if like if you grew up in a toxic environment, is interesting. Like, and also going from like, oh, your mother is raising you to be able to kill people and do these things as like the chosen one, and then talking to a therapist about that later and being like, hey, you don't owe, like, you weren't, your life is your own, it's not for anyone's purpose, and like stuff like that. And like that I think is a really interesting concept, which in our therapy riddled age, I feel like hasn't been brought up in as many books as we would think it would be. Like they kind of, whip at it and like Wreck-It Ralph and stuff like that to a degree, but I think it's a really interesting concept. And but the way they deal with the trauma and everything is very serious. And with all of the ways they talk about things, it feels very real. Better feels like a very real person who's kind of in over his head. Obviously, I can't speak to any sort of ending for it or anything like that, but like I said, I am invested in it so far. It is an interesting world, one that I would like to learn more about. And as somebody who loves research, who loves diving into stuff, their analysis of like the break doors and trying to figure out what's going on with that is very interesting. So yeah.
Is this a standalone or is it a part of a series?
As far as I know, it's a standalone. I can double check, but it didn't say on like Storygraph that it was the first of anything. Yeah, it doesn't look like it's the first of a series or anything.
I always wonder that one of the reasons I asked is, I mean, it's like a fantasy book and I am aware of that, but like I always wonder what the capacity is of books that are in series to win awards, since the story isn't like, you know what I mean? So I was just curious.
Well, I mean, counterpoint to that would be Broken Earth trilogy. Each book
That's
in
true.
that winning the Hugo every year. Yeah, no, and that's an interesting question too, because I think that like I don't know how it is for other. It might be easier for like sci-fi fantasy books to get away with something like that because I mean, first of all, it's hard. I feel like to have like multiple books in a series for like that. But also, like, you definitely don't really see any sort of series books getting stuff from the different words. So, yeah, an interesting thought.
I also find it I don't know if it's just recency bias, but I feel like the last 10 years or so there's been this shift in fantasy where a lot of the books that are getting like noteworthy and Hugo's, Nebula's, whatever's going on are there's a lot more written by women and a lot more written by people of color, and like that's a good thing because the genre overall I feel like before this was like very much like Tolkien-esque. Just like we're just going to do the same thing that Tolkien did in like a slightly different world type thing, and we're moving into an era I feel like where there's a lot more diversity in the genres, and I'm a fan of that, and I think that the awards are also reflecting that in a way. Yeah, it's cool.
And it's nice to, this one also, it has some queerness in it as well. Like, as soon as he's in there, yeah, he has a boyfriend. And, but then also kind of like, as he picks up communication with his mother, again, she's like instantly like, you know that there's laws against sodomy. And, just like such like a real, like, toxic mother thing to say, especially one who is like, you know, trying to be like as manipulative as possible, trying to warn you about like the real, like, the dangers to your literal safety that she's raised you in, like that sort of thing. It's just like such a like like oh yeah, no, that tracks, like, hang up the phone better. It's not worth it.
Yeah. I'm one of
Also
those.
sounds like it.
Oh, go ahead, Josh. You haven't spoken. Go ahead.
It's like it's touching upon modern concerns, which is a good thing, even if it's a different uh, world that we're talking about. And I think that that's what good speculative fiction, that's probably what good any kind of fiction does, but especially speculative fiction, be it sci-fi, fantasy, horror, where because the real fears and the real demons are not necessarily the ones that are created, but the reality that exists behind it. I have not read or heard about the winner of the book that you had spoken about, but from what you have said, it does really seem to touch upon those modern concerns.
And it's a little bit jarring, honestly, sometimes when it's like talking about like, oh, Feder can float and he doesn't have a shadow. And there's someone in his group that when they talk, like, people are struck with these wild visions because of this thing that like they're going through. And like Feder can see demons and stuff like that. And it's like it's very jarring to have that and then be like, Feder sent off a text, and like Feder went to, like, and this is what Feder's therapist said, and like stuff like that. And it is kind of jarring to kind of have those like contradictions, but it also, I think, like, grounds some of the story in a way too, where it's just like, oh, this does feel like a very real person or thought or whatever.
And like trying to like navigate that where it's like people can understand it as like an allegory for like humanness, right? And I don't necessarily mean humanness is like a humanoid, but like, you know, the root of all of us, like humanity, right? Because I feel like sometimes the best thing, like Josh was saying about speculative fiction, is like it moves the camera angle a little bit, and it's like maybe something that you wouldn't have thought about like that head on, like in a literary fiction or a nonfiction sense, like when it's placed into a speculative setting, you can like maybe grapple with it a little bit more too. Or like, you know, it's kind of like the Nathan Pyle like Alien comics where they like take like a little like normal thing and make it weird. And then you're like, wait, why do we do that?
And like, and I think that there is also probably a fair amount of the cultural aspect of it that I'm missing. Because, like I said, I feel like there's probably a lot of nods to Indian Sri Lankan culture, that I am very unfamiliar with, which is why I would definitely love to do like some research on that sort of stuff after I'm done reading it. Um, to because like I said, it feels like there's some past stuff that's thrown in there, things that maybe an audience who's not a USA born white person would necessarily know right off the bat.
Okay. Josh, you want to talk about your splatterpunk?
It was actually when you came up with the prompt and it was time for me to get ready, I actually bought some books to prepare. I was looking at Walter Scott, Scott Odell, but then I did some research and realized that I already owned an award-winning book from this year, and I bought it back in March when I was at Asbury Book Cooperative in Asbury Park. I was going to Silent Book Club, and the book that I chose is May Fly by C.J. Lee.
I own a
What a
copy.
cover.
And it is the premise of the book is that it has to do with our title character. She works as a Disney princess. In particular, she's Elsa, but they don't mention Disney by name. They don't mention certain characters by name. They'll mention Snow White and Cinderella, but they won't mention Elsa or Anna. Her friend Kate plays Anna, and you can tell that they're pretty badass in their nature, and they make the best out of the situation, and they have she doesn't like her coworker Liz, who was a fursuit character, but then got a promotion, and Andre just got a position, but Maeve is the two people that she really likes in her life are Kate and her grandmother, who is in a vegetative state and is basically they have to have a nurse come in and just keep her just to do what needs to be done in order to keep her alive. And what happens is Maeve also has this bit of a dark side outside of her. And when she meets Kate's brother, Gideon, who she really forms a relationship with, or a bond with, she starts to form into this Bateman-style character, like an American Psycho inspired serial killer that wants to wreak havoc. Which I don't want to spoil too much, but I will say that it really doesn't. It does take a while to work up to that, and the one thing that really makes me think is that it really explores the idea of that feminist angle of if a woman is, or if a female is going to engage in that kind of activity, there has to be some kind of reason. But for males, that there's no, they can do it and nobody will question, say something along the lines of, oh, something bad happened in their life. But it also explores that avenue that it doesn't necessarily matter your gender, but your actions do have consequences. And to me, even though this was very thought-provoking, Maeve, you can't say that she was a likable anti-hero. She was a little bit selfish in her nature, but it was quite realistic that she does have a conscience, and that the fact that she does tackle her decisions and bears regrets, where she doesn't necessarily go off the deep end, where uh, she where she's the kind of person that just loses any sense of humanity.
Hmm. I'm assuming because it won Splatterpunk, it's high gore, correct?
Yes, there is, and there are things that I was very much. I could definitely sense that. I mean, granted, when she engages in her all activities, uh, she'll have the blood all over her, and you could see she the bones don't go to waste. They make some pretty good decorations.
Uh, I feel like Splatterpunk is such a like niche genre in horror. Like it's not one that a lot of people lean towards, probably because of the like squick factor of the sheer amount of violence and gore that's usually just like part of it. So it's neat. It's neat to sort of see people like really enjoy that.
Josh brought a U-book.
Listen, it's fine. I brought literary fiction, so we just traded minds for a second.
Stephen King in Dance Macabre, he said that when it comes to writing the most effective horror, you terrify, then you horrify, and if they don't work, you go for the gross out. Which that's probably why people are, if they're going to get into horror, because horror is one of those things that people are not necessarily. Horror is not necessarily a genre that's for everybody, but the ones that get into it, splatterpunk is probably one of the last things they're going to get into because of its nature. That's probably the fact that it's blood and gore is a lot of the reason why people are turned away by horror. But you have your enthusiasts that will recognize that and embrace it, even though, I mean, I think that there's like Soylent Green, the movie, or the Twilight Zone episode To Serve Man. They can do so much to produce that eerie image in your head without having to show you anything.
Yeah.
I mean, this is a splatterpunk winner. This absolutely does not abide to that. But you have to be able to enjoy and admire something for what it is, as long as it's not immoral. And I didn't think that this was immoral. I think it would have, like Titus Andronicus by Shakespeare, was immoral. The some of what Jack Ketchum wrote, I felt was immoral.
I mean, I think Michaela and I slightly discussed this when we read Bury Your Gaze by Chuck Tingle. And I think for me, so I'm like not a horror person, but if you were going to give me an option, right, and I had to choose one of these two books for like Live to See Tomorrow, and I had to read either like a splatterpunk or a psychological like horror thriller, I think I would prefer to read the splatterpunk. Because in my brain, I'm like, it's not real. There's like, it's all catch up, like whatever. But like, I think, Michaela and I were talking about that book and how there is some like really, really gory scenes. But like the creepiest thing was when the main character was being followed by a diseased sheep.
Yep.
That just kept like randomly appearing. And I was like, no, bring it back to when their skulls were getting bashed in. I don't want to feel like I'm being haunted in the shadows by a diseased sheep. So I have to say, like, and I mean, you're probably right that like there's a lot of people that don't like gore. I would just as someone that for me, I think is creepier. Like, I want to be able to go to sleep at night.
You are part of the minority. Yeah, most people, if they do get into horror, it's psychological or gothic.
All right, well, I'm weird. Welcome to this new
I mean,
piece of information.
I kind of agree. I think that, like, for me, I think it would be kind of a it's all catch up situation. but and like yeah, I've read a couple of horror books. Like I don't know if horror books really do it for me, um, because I read so quickly that it doesn't like give time to sink in, or it's just kind of like no, this is just words on a page. You hand me a true crime though, I will sleep with the lights on. So I think that I think that I could probably get behind Spotify being easier too, although that term is new to me as of tonight. And all I can think of is Repo the Genetic Opera, which I tried to show somebody in college, and she was just like, "Ew, what?" And I'm just like, "No, don't touch it. This is stupid and fun. What are you touching it for? Don't judge me."
Yeah.
Yeah, I will say
Were you,
that like I remember when Michaela had me read You'll Be Gone in the Dark.
Yeah,
And this was before they had caught the State Killer.
yeah,
And this was also the beginning of my true crime binge because I'm now like, I mean, again, just reference my last review where I was reading a true crime book and also watching true crime documentaries. My therapist has feelings about this. It's fine. But
I
like
have feelings
I went
about
to
this.
Michaela, I was like, great, now I can't go to California until they catch the guy.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think I
Just
read
like,
that because you said it was good, and then I couldn't sleep.
yeah, look, it is good.
It
It
is
is good.
good.
And I also have a book documentary review on that one too, because I did a second one. And the HBO Max documentary, even better, um, in its own way. But like, yeah, I can't if I read true crime, that shit's gotta be solved.
The
Or
only
I have
thing,
to start like Xing states off the map.
the one that I didn't mind at all was In Cold Blood, because because it was written so much like a novel, and because I know that Capote like embellished the hell out of it.
Mm.
Um, like he definitely kind of like tampered with how he told the story. So it didn't bother me as much. It bothered my husband a lot when he had first read it, but he had first read it when he was like high school or something. But like my sister can do true crime podcasts. I listen to like a couple and I'm just like, nope, nope. I don't care if this is solved. I'm very uncomfortable now. So I definitely prefer a everything is kept up.
See, it's really funny because as someone who's like, I love horror. Like, horror is my bread and butter. That's my house. That's where I live. I struggle with some splatterpunk, and I don't know if it's like an empathy thing because in the same way that I love like horror movies, I hate Saw because like watching bones break and like watching like that level of like gore in my face, I'm like, no,
There's a
can't
big difference between reading it and watching it too. And
even.
like something like Saw is like there
I
to
can't
make
watch
you
it.
feel the end. And like so I feel like that can test like a lot of people probably.
Yeah, I get it when reading too. When I'm reading
Oh
like
yeah.
too descriptive of like something
Mm.
happening, specifically to bones. Like I'm pretty okay with like flesh wounds. Like you can stab and cut up
We
and
all have our thing. You
that's
know, like
fine. As soon
for
as
me
bones are
it's like
breaking or involved and I'm like, "No, stop."
for me it's nails.
Okay.
And there's a scene in Pan's Labyrinth which I adore. I think that movie's incredible. But there's like a torture scene where they're like putting nails, and I'm just like, ah, no, it's just like I have to skip that part.
Don't look.
Yeah.
What was that,
that's the
Jess?
thing. For me, it would be genitals. That's the one
Okay.
that is the most. But I mean, I was going to say, as far as you could you could be talking about like a Richard Lehman novel where you're being chased by mindless killers and your resort is to have sex because he's known for that.
Yeah.
Sex scenes.
If people want sexual horror, I read Brainworms this year, and that was like the most gross out sex horror that I have ever seen in my life. So if
I'm good,
people,
thanks.
if people want that,
I'll pass.
because there like horror people are into things. It was a very interesting book when it came to discussing specifically the internet and the way that it radicalizes people within the context of trans community in particular, the like kind of opening incident of that book is that there is a bombing at a clinic, a gender clinic, where people go to get like their hormones and stuff like that. And both of the protagonists of that one are gender weird. One of them is trans and one of them is non-binary. But yeah, there's a lot of like really gross sexual horror in that book. So be prepared for literally anything that you can think of, and then probably something worse.
I like the short story "Eat Me" by Robert McCammon, which has to do with zombie sex. When they were putting together the anthology, it was John Skip. It was Zombies Encounters with the Hungry Dead. Said that he had his limits as far as he was very often turned off by like sex in horror and things that were more pornographic. But he made that exception with he felt that what Robert McCammon did was brilliant. And I mean, Robert McCammon is probably one of the most brilliant speculative fiction authors there is.
Are we good? Off the back of that, we can talk about some literary fiction. Go to like the complete other side of the spectrum here.
Good.
Hey, that's why we do this. We all brought a different thing. It's just that you did not. Well, actually, I don't know that you didn't bring a P book yet, but I'll let you carry on.
I mean, it was referenced in the way that like there was a discussion of how astronauts use the bathroom, but not in like an explicit way. It's not a P book.
Not in the way. Okay, well,
not in the way that some of my other books have been P books this year. And again, not intentionally. I was not a fan of it, and I didn't want it, but it was forced upon me. Anyway, so I read Orbital by Samantha Harvey, which is the winner of the Booker Prize this year. I initially picked this up from the library on audio, and I was like, oh, it's like 5 hours. Easy mode. I listened to the first 25% of this book and went, I don't think I internalized any of that. Let me restart it. And then I listened to the first half of this book, and I went, I still feel like I didn't... What? And then I had to go buy a physical copy of it and listen and read at the same time in order to comprehend this book in any capacity. I'll talk a little bit about that. But I don't recommend just the audio on this one. If you're going to read this, I would read it physically or do both at the same time. I don't... Just by the way that this book is structured, I don't think that it is easy to hold on to what is going on in the story with just listening to it. And it's specifically based on how this book is structured. The general idea of the plot of this book is that it is following 24 hours or 16 cycles of the International Space Station going around the Earth. There are 6 astronauts that are living there, and you're kind of with them throughout this day. It's the day that a shuttle has just left Earth to go to the moon. So there's a little bit of talk about like these astronauts aren't going to the moon. They're just in the space station, and like they're kind of getting like surpassed by these other astronauts. They're now kind of yesterday's news. One of the astronauts finds out on this day as well that her mother has passed away and she can't do anything. She can't go to the funeral, obviously, because she's in space. The rest of it are just sort of them like thinking and musing on certain things. But that's like pretty much it. Like that is the plot of it, period. When I finished this book, felt like I wanted to like go back with highlighters and like highlight when each astronaut was specifically referenced and when we were like kind of looking at what they were thinking about. But I was conflicted because I feel like if I went back and did that, I would be disappointed by how little actual stuff is going on. Like there's very little plot, like hardly any. It's all thoughts, which is part of why it's really hard to grasp this. there's 2 female astronauts and 4 men, and I literally had to like break out a sticky note and write down their names in order to keep them separate because they're so few references and things to grasp onto to be able to tell like this guy versus this guy apart. The only reason I was able to tell the women apart is that Chie is Japanese and she's the one whose mom's died. And then there's Nell, who is just the other woman. like I was like, okay, I know who Chie is. But then there's 2 Russian cosmonauts, an Italian astronaut, and an American guy. And Nell is British. So 2 cosmonauts, and then everybody else is from a different country all up there. They do each sort of have a thread or a thought that they're thinking about throughout the book. Like once I was able to grasp who was who, I was like, okay, I see like the earlier parts, like definitely this is like building on these thoughts that you had earlier. I see where we're going with this. But it was really hard to like get that straight in my head. And for a book that's I mean, this paperback is 200 pages, but I think the hardcover of it was like 107. Like, there's like not a lot of pages to this book. Like, it shouldn't be this hard for me to grasp what's going on. And I can't even say it's because I haven't been reading literary fiction, because this is the 3rd literary fiction book I've read in like the last 4 months. So I am kind of used to that level of writing and language. Like, I know someone might say, well, Michaela, you read like horror. Like, obviously the like writing level is different. It's not that. It's the structure of the way this is. I understand why the structure is the way it is. This book is cycling constantly, but it builds that into the structure by using these lists and listing and listing and listing, so you feel like you're kind of like tumbling, and then also this like detachment from real plot makes you kind of feel like you're literally like untethered, which again is sort of mimicking these astronauts in a gravity-less space station, right? Like you there's nothing, you get a little thing that you can kind of hold on to for a second, and then it's gone away and you're in another thought over here. And like from a structural standpoint, I get it. That's super cool. From a writing standpoint, again, super cool that you're able to mimic the idea of this novel being about cycles and orbiting with the actual structure, but from an experience of reading it perspective, kind of not my favorite. Um, I I don't I'm glad this book is as short as it is, because I do feel like it's one of those books that I might need to read it a second. Well, at this point, what, a 4th time restarting it in order to like fully grasp what's going on. I don't know necessarily that every book like if this was like the pinnacle of writing, right? Like a lot of people look to the Booker Prize for like the best book that was written all year. Not everybody, but a lot of people really do. I don't know that I want like anybody to emulate this, because again, it's not like a great experience for reading. And even the thoughts that are brought up in here, discussions of climate, because there's a typhoon that's going on, one of the astronauts is very concerned about. There's discussions of like mortality, because obviously Chie's mom dies, so she's going on the grief side of that spectrum, but one of the astronauts also has found what is most likely a cancerous lump on him, and he doesn't want any of the other astronauts to know, because if they do, then he would have to go back to Earth, and he can't go by himself, so 3 of them, like 2 others, would also have to come back, so he's cutting their space trip short as well. And obviously for a lot of them, this is what they've been training for their whole lives. So he's pretty much just kind of accepted that he's gonna let this cancer do whatever it's gonna do for however long he's got left in space, and most likely it will kill him. But again, this is the thing that he's worked his whole life for, and he's doing it, so why would he like sacrifice that and also take it away from some other folks who've been doing this for their whole lives, type thing. They're not thoughts that I haven't heard or seen discussed in other books. Like, there's nothing new here. And I know when we talk about literary fiction, getting at like what it means to be a human and like the core of humanity. Okay, it does that. But there's other books I feel like do it better that I have read. I don't know necessarily that this is one that I'm gonna like give to people and be like, you have to read this. It was 3 stars. I read it. It was a book. It did something kind of cool with the structure, but it was kind of awful to read. Um, that's where I'm at here.
It definitely sounds like a book that kind of got, it was like the author was just kind of too caught up in their theming and the structure and everything to remember to make it like a book and like an enjoyable experience for the layperson, because
Yeah.
like, and not that y'all are lay people per se, but you're not, Booker Award givers,
Judges, yeah.
reviewers. Um, and so like I just like it feels weird to construct a book that isn't going to be exactly a ton of fun to read and
Okay,
is
but
aimed so
that's the Booker.
specifically. I know that's the Booker, but like
So I have
uh,
a massive vendetta against the Booker Award. This is going on a decade now. Michaela has been here for it, and every single time I have been approached with a Booker shortlist, long list winner, there is a single author whose books I have not hated, and that's Kazuo Ishiguro. But also none of the Bookers are ever a good time. Every single Booker, I swear to God, is the most depressing book y'all ever read.
It's not even depressing though. Like,
I know. Well, this one. So obviously, Michaela and I have been talking about this book while Michaela has been trying to read it, and every single time I'm just like, this. I'm not even reading this, and it gives me a headache.
yeah, I knew right away this was not a book to give Gretchen. Like, this is not a Gretchen book. But again, I don't go to literary fiction for an enjoyable time, right? Like, I'm not reading it for entertainment, but I do still want to be able to understand the book.
Yes.
Like at bare minimum, I would like to just comprehend it. And I don't feel like I'm stupid. Like, it's not like I like it's the structure is it slides off of you. Like, okay, another list of countries and places and cities and colors. Okay, another list of countries and places and cities and colors while we're thinking about death. Okay, another list of countries and places. Like, this means nothing, and it's just going in one ear and out the other, and I have nothing to hold on to, and I have nothing to take away.
And literary fiction is often driven by thoughts and one's ability to write for themselves and convey it to other people. And I think that that's what the award committees seem to embrace most, whereas every other uh, every other genre is primarily plot driven.
Yeah.
But people want to see something that's unique and experimental and a different approach being casted. I mean, I was talking to my American literature instructor about Cornwall, and he said that the way to distinguish is if you're writing for yourself, then you call it literary fiction. As far the one time that I heard about this book is when we were doing the Alphabet Roundtable read on my channel, and Danielle from PJs and Pages, she was assigned the letter O, and she chose this book. So I'd heard about this before it won the Booker, so it was interesting to see it pop up again.
Yeah. Oh, the only other thing I wanted to talk about, which I mentioned at the beginning, was that this isn't science fiction, because it's actually taking the stance of astronauts on the space station kind of being in the past when it's discussing how there's like people going to the moon and the way that like people being able to live in a space station orbiting the Earth is now kind of old science. And when we talk about books set in space, we're normally like, that's the future. But this actually is the past. Like, being able to be in close Earth orbit is not the future anymore. Now we are looking towards interstellar travel or colonizing other planets. That's where science fiction, science future is looking to go when it comes to space travel. Which is why, like, yes, it's set in space, but it's also not looking at like what a future in space would be like. It's kind of looking at what our past in space has looked at.
I mean, no shade to this author, but I just kind of feel like as you're describing it, I'm just like, just give it to How High We Go in the Dark.
And you can't really classify what your what genre you're writing under. And your book also can take on a different kind of form. I think Flowers for Algernon, for instance, won award. I think it was the Hugo Award. It
Mm.
was originally, when it was released, it was viewed as science fiction, and people debate what genre it would fall under. I mean, I argue it falls under literary fiction. Fahrenheit 451, science fiction as when it came out, but it seems to have that literary merit that it can be studied in schools.
So yeah, I feel like for me, literary fiction gets shelved in the fiction genre, where I feel like literary fiction just means fiction with excellent caliber of writing and should go not in fiction but in the genre that it makes sense in. We just read How High We Go in the Dark, or How High You Go in the Dark, something like that. Which is shelved in fiction but is very clearly science fiction. Like there's clear speculative elements that has like nothing to do with our current reality, or past reality, which is sort of what I look for in the fiction section. And I said, just because the caliber of this writing and the fact that it kind of focuses on a sad theme doesn't make it not science fiction anymore. It's still science fiction. It's just literary science fiction. Like it should still, in the same way that Jeff Vandermeer doesn't like his books put into fiction, put into sci-fi, despite being eco horror, eco sci-fi. Like it's very clearly part of that genre. But just
Definitely
because you
sci-fi.
feel just because you feel like your book's writing quality is better than what you would consider sci-fi doesn't make it not sci-fi.
Yes, what there is literary, and then there's pulp.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, right.
Yeah.
I mean, the
Yeah.
same is true of fiction, right?
Yeah.
There's literary fiction, and then there's pulp. Like
Yeah.
yeah,
The
the
pulp seems to
idea.
be writing for the market,
Yes.
whereas the
Yeah.
literary is more so writing for yourself to tell your story for the experience,
Yeah.
Yeah,
rather
but to
than
say
right.
that what makes a genre of fiction is like inherently less well written than any literary fiction book is
Right.
irritating.
I think it is definitely like genre politics of like real fiction isn't genre fiction. When genre fiction can tackle a lot of the same elements and with the same caliber of writing using these sort of tropes and elements that are known for those genres. Anyway, 3 stars. It was whatever. I read it. I read it multiple times in varying capacities.
I'm props to you for continuing because I'm pretty sure I would have quit the first time and I just would have been like, nah, we're going elsewhere. So props to you for commitment to the bit.
It like I feel like I'm being very I did like highlight stuff. Like I don't know if it's gonna pop up, but there was some. Like there's stuff highlighted because the writing is very beautiful. Like it is super beautiful. But like I can't rate this book higher, not just from like an enjoyment perspective, but because of how difficult it is to get anything out of it. Like I wouldn't have been able to highlight those quotes on an audiobook. And I slowed down the audiobook. Like normally I listen to audiobooks at 3 times speed because that's how fast my brain works. Like I need people to be talking that fast. I slowed it all the way down to 2 times speed, which I know is already faster than like most people listen to audiobooks, but that's like snail's pace for my brain. Like it would be the equivalent of somebody who listens at 1 time speed slowing it down to half speed. Like that's how it feels. And even then I listened to it with my partner. He started a drinking game with the last 30 minutes of the audiobook where every time there was a list of things he took a shot, and in the last 30 minutes he had to take 10 shots because of how many lists there were.
Like, you gave him alcohol poisoning.
I literally told him not to do it because again we'd listened to 4.5 hours of this audiobook up till this point, and I was like, don't do that, you're gonna kill yourself. It's all lists, the whole thing is lists.
But I am kind of curious as to what like if it was read in like a book club or something, you know, what voices on it would be, and like with those kinds of books, like I'm interested in reading those to just kind of like experience that,
Yeah.
and to be like I'm interested in having that experience as well, and that's kind of why I want like people to read like Name of the Wind and stuff like that, because it's just like I need to hear your input on this, because like I can't be the only one that thinks like this, right? So like I'm interested in like what like a book club conversation on that book would look like.
I do feel like if you're going to tackle this one, have highlighters and sticky notes so that you can kind of
I
track.
probably won't.
Okay,
it's
well,
like, I'm like I have like the interest of like, oh, that would be an interesting experience. I'm not gonna do it.
Michaela has not sold us.
For the watcher who may still be interested in it, because again, like it has the literary merit. I applaud it for being able to represent the feeling of being in space through the structure of the writing, which I think is why it won. Like I don't think I have ever read another book that has made me physically feel through the experience of writing like I am floating untethered in a miasma. But
that's not how you want to feel, though. Like, you don't want to feel that way about the book you're reading.
Me,
like, if it,
every time I read a Booker, I don't want to feel this way.
like, I feel like
I've liked Bookers. I'm just gonna say I have liked Bookers. There are Bookers that I have enjoyed, and not again. It's not like a popcorn book. I'm reading this to think thoughts, but I've
just, like,
had Bookers that made me think thoughts in a way that I was enjoying the thoughts more than this.
I feel like if you're describing the writing and the experience of reading the book as feeling untethered, and not like the language that describes feeling untethered in the book, making you feel like, oh, I get that physical sensation. And no, you're feeling that about just the process of
comprehend this
book.
Yeah.
That's a fully different thing.
Yeah. Again, not a bad book. It is a book. It's not my favorite book.
Can confirm is words on paper bound.
Things happened. There's no quotation marks as well when they communicate with each other. So if you are a person that is bothered by that, no quotations. I applaud the audiobook reader, because I was like, how did you know that person said that? There's no indication to me that it was a new person talking. Sometimes they're in the same paragraph, different people talking to each other in the same paragraph. And I'm like,
nope. This is solid. Nope.
Yeah.
So this has been an awesome discussion. I'm so glad that everybody brought different genres and different things. You know, again, we didn't plan it, but because our friends are so awesome, every single episode is just another case of awesome. So talking about what we're looking forward to, this is our last reading roundtable of the year. And unless something super special happens, it is our last Betwixt content for the year as well. So thank you for Josh and Erica for sending us out on such a high beat. We are very excited, Michaela and I, to be working on some extra special stuff for the beginning of 2025. So the theme of this reading roundtable, which was to read a award winner, was part of Michaela and I's buddy reading challenge. Every single year, we set ourselves 10 challenges that you too can follow along with on Storygraph if you use that. And it is something that we do every year to push ourselves to read a little bit wider than we did the year before. So for example, we have some really awesome new challenges that we're really excited about for 2025. And to watch that and to hear what they are, you'll have to see our announcement video, which will be coming out. So first, we're going to put out a wrap up of how we did in 2024. Hint, we didn't finish all of them because we never do.
No.
Again, logic would suggest that we choose less than 10 challenges. We never do.
No.
So we'll tell you how that went, which books we read, which ones we failed at, which ones we're rolling over, and then we'll have an announcement video for what our 2025 challenges are. And then, of course, the reading roundtables will be coming back around in 2025. We have 2 new topics that we've already decided on for January and February, which are also a secret surprise because they have not even been announced to our participants yet. And so don't fear, this channel will continue to do this content as well, as long as we do not scare away our very, very awesome bookish friends. So So thank you so much to, again, especially to Josh and Erica for joining us today, for all of you for watching, and we will see you for more exciting content in 2025. Thanks, guys. Bye.